In this video, I want to talk about how to write conclusion statements after you have completed your hypothesis test and gotten your results. Now remember that a hypothesis test does not prove anything. Statistics is based on probabilities, and so we are looking at the probability of something occurring, and it doesn't absolutely prove that it is true. Now, the outcome of your hypothesis test simply supports or fails to support the null hypothesis. And remember, the p-value that we get at the end of our hypothesis test represents the probability of getting the sample results that we just got, given that the null hypothesis is true. So the p-value is a measure of the strength of the null hypothesis. Now, here are two little statements that will help you remember whether you accept or reject the null hypothesis. If the p-value is low, the null must go. So if I get a p-value that's smaller than my level of significance or my alpha, then I would reject the null hypothesis. If the p-value is high, the null must fly. So if I get a p-value that is larger than alpha, then I would fail to reject the null hypothesis. So let's talk about how we actually write the conclusion statement. There is actually a prescribed format for the conclusion statement. It needs to include certain information. And the statement that I have here, the things that are in red, you would actually put into your conclusion statement based upon your results. So you would say, since the p-value of, and you would insert what your p-value is. Then you would say you would insert whether it's greater than or less than the alpha level of, and you would insert your alpha level. The sample data supports either acceptance or rejection of the null hypothesis. Therefore, there is evidence that, and at that point you would include the word statement from the hypothesis that actually is being supported by the sample. So either the alternate or the null, depending upon which the p-value supported. So let's go through and do a couple examples. Now, these examples we actually talked about on the video that I did earlier on how to write hypothesis statements. So now we're going to take that information and actually take it through StatDisc and come up with a conclusion. So this is the survey of study habits and attitudes, and it is a measure of study habits that students have toward school. The scores range from 0 to 200. But the average, the mean, is 115. We have a teacher, however, that suspects that for older students, we get a higher mean than 115. So she went out and she did a sample of 25 students, and she found that their score was 118.6 and a standard deviation of 30. What we want to do is we want to do a t-test, state the conclusion with a level of significance of 0.05. So recall from our earlier video that our hypotheses are, the null hypothesis is the mean score is equal to 115. The researcher's claim, which is always the alternate hypothesis, is that the mean is greater than 115. So I ran this information all through StatDisc, and here are my results. Now let me just say something about this first one in a little bit more detail. In StatDisc, I chose analysis, hypothesis test, one sample. That's how I got to this screen. Then I am going to have to change this drop-down menu to agree with the alternate hypothesis. Now, the information on the left, I actually have to enter. So my level of significance was 0.05. The claimed mean is always the numerical value given in the null hypothesis. So that was 115. Then I filled in the information from my sample, which was the size, the mean, and the standard deviation. And I hit evaluate, and I got the screen on the left-hand side. Now notice that it does tell me that I used mu greater than mu, which is what did agree with my drop-down menu. And in this instance, I got a p-value of a 0.2771. So those are my results. So now let's see if I can do a conclusion from this. So in this instance, my p-value of 0.2771 is greater than my alpha level of 0.05. So the null hypothesis is not rejected. So the p-value is high, so the null must fly. So here is my conclusion statement. And so remember, I'm taking the conclusion statement that I gave you on that second slide, and all I'm doing is filling in information pertinent to what I got in StatDisk. So since the p-value of 0.2771 is greater than my alpha level of 0.05, the sample data does not support rejection of the null hypothesis. Therefore, there is evidence to support the average score on the SSHA is 115. So my therefore statement is the verbiage that supports that null hypothesis that the score is 115. So let's look at another example. Now this again is an example from that previous video, and the average income of women who work full-time but only have a high school diploma is $31,666 nationally. But you want to figure out if that's the case for the female graduates that fit into this category from your local high school. So you want to know if it is different from. So you go out and you get a sample, and this is a simple random sample of 62 females, and you find out that their sample mean is $30,052, their standard deviation is $1,025, and we want to perform a t-test at the 0.01 level of significance and find our conclusion. And these are our hypotheses as stated in that earlier video. So I took the information from this problem and I ran it through StatDisk. So I did change my drop-down menu to agree with the alternate hypothesis of not equal to. I put in my level of significance, my claimed mean from the null hypothesis, sample size, sample mean, and sample standard deviation. And notice I got a p-value of 0. So let's look at the conclusion. So the p-value of 0 is less than my alpha level of 0.01. So the null hypothesis would be rejected. Since the p-value is low, the null must go. So here is my statement. And again, remember, I'm just going back to that conclusion statement from slide 2 and filling in the values that I got from this particular t-test. So, since the p-value of 0 is less than the alpha level of 0.01, the sample data supports rejection of the null hypothesis. Therefore, there is evidence to support the average salary of full-time high school graduates from your high school is not equal to that national average. One more example. So in this example, we have a student group that maintains that the one-way travel time to campus of an average student is 25 minutes. However, the admissions office obtained a random sample of 31 one-way travel times and found that the mean was 19.4 minutes and that the standard deviation was 9.6 minutes. So what we want to do is to do a t-test with a significance level of 0.05 and state our conclusion. So here are the hypotheses from our earlier video. So the mean for the null hypothesis is what is commonly thought of as being the average, which is 25 minutes. And our researchers' conjecture or claim is that it's less than that. So here are my results from StatDisk. And I, again, changed that drop down to agree with the alternate hypothesis. I put in the information that we had in the verbiage of the problem, and I hit evaluate. Now notice that my p-value is a 0.0014. So what would you think the conclusion would be? Okay, so here comes the conclusion statement. So our p-value of 0.0014 is less than alpha. So the null hypothesis is going to be rejected. So here is my conclusion statement. Since the p-value of 0.0014 is less than the alpha level of 0.05, the sample data supports rejection of the null hypothesis. Therefore, there is evidence to support that the one-way travel time to campus is less than 25 minutes, which basically means it's supporting the null hypothesis, the alternate hypothesis.